Hi, this is Daniel Nelson of OneWorld UK, and behind the camera is Jeffrey Allen of OneWorld US. We're broadcasting, or is it netcasting, Jeff will tell me later, from Indonesia, or to be precise, from an island within an island. This is OneClimate.net island on Second Life. And every night we're bringing you one of the day's news conferences from Bali, where governments and their advisors and international organizations, watched by NGOs and journalists, are trying to agree on the details of a 2-year plan for negotiations on climate change. And seeing the press conference, which I hope you've just done, is exclusive to Second Lifers. Actually, even most delegates don't get to see it because the press conferences are for journalists only. So you get a little exclusive look. And also every night we bring in a couple of people to interview participants at the conference, and most important of all, you've got a chance to put questions. So I hope you've got I was going to say a pen and paper, but the keyboard ready, and send in your questions and I'll put them to the guests and you may get an answer. I just want to underline that this is an experiment. I think it's the future, and after 1 week I think I can say it's a success. The Second Life audience is gradually growing, and the interviews also appear on OneClimate.net and turn up on YouTube. So it's popular participation and it saves carbon. And just a reminder, we'll be here on Saturday and Sunday as well, because there's a conference within a conference that we'll bring you reports from. Okay, that's rather a long-winded introduction, but tonight's visitor, which is the main point, is John Holdren, professor at Harvard and director of the Woods Hole Research Center in the US, which I don't think I'll go into a lengthy explanation, but it is one of the most prestigious research centers in the US, probably in the world, in fact. So thank you for coming. We're very grateful. So let's start. If you want to send in questions, please do, but I've got a few of my own to start with. And the first one is rather long-winded, but I was going to ask you, a lot of work is done in industrialized countries about developing countries, and we recommend actions. I say we because I'm from Britain as well, and we recommend action that countries should take. And I wonder whether we shouldn't spend more time looking at ourselves. We're the countries that are consuming, with our very high consumption levels, causing historically this problem. And I wonder whether we shouldn't focus first on putting our own problems to right before spending a lot of time looking at other countries in the South.
Well, I think that's right. We should, and many of us do. That is, in my work, both at the Woods Hole Research Center and at Harvard University, we have a very large focus on the United States, what the United States could do, should do, and isn't doing. And we spend a lot of time trying to advise people in the government who are willing to listen about what the United States should be doing. I think the biggest obstacle to moving forward on the climate issue in the world today is the failure of the United States up until now to take serious steps to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of our own country. But it's also important, I think, to cooperate with developing countries. It's important for a number of reasons, including the big opportunities for sharing insights and for sharing technologies that can help address the climate change problem in ways that also pursue the goals of sustainable development.
Okay, you've caught me on the hop there because I was going to have some questions about the US, but since you've mentioned it, I might bring them forward. On the opening day here, an Indonesian minister said that the scientific data has been laid to rest by the IPCC. And I wonder if that is true in the US, or whether there is still a serious ongoing debate about the scientific basis, because here the Secretariat is definitely making it very clear that as far as this conference is concerned, the debate on the science is not over. It's never over, but it's established and we can move on from there.
Yes, I think on the big points, on the main points, the science is well established. We know that the climate is changing in very unusual ways. We know that human beings are responsible for most of that. We know that we don't have much time to take evasive action before those changes become unmanageable. There are lots of scientific details about which arguments continue. But the big picture is perfectly clear, and even in the United States, where one hears quite a lot from the skeptics, The skeptics are really a handful, a bare handful of vocal individuals who are mostly now not saying that climate change isn't real. They're no longer saying that humans aren't causing it. What they're saying now is it won't amount to all that much. And they're just as wrong about that as they were previously wrong about saying it's not changing or humans aren't doing it. The great bulk of the public, as well as the vast, vast majority of scientists who look at this question, are in agreement that climate change is real, that humans are doing it, that we have to take evasive action, we have to do it soon, it has to include mandatory economy-wide measures. And among the small handful of people in the country who haven't agreed with that yet are unfortunately the President and Vice President of the United States. I think most people in the Congress, on the other hand, are ready to act. I think most people in the executive branch would be ready to act were it not for the circumstance that the people at the top oppose, for basically ideological reasons, they oppose mandatory measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, can we just stick with this for a moment then, because it's raised a couple of very interesting issues. On that same opening day here, De Boer, the executive secretary, said we have to deliver a long-term approach that the U.S. will embrace. And I wondered what you think will fill the bill. What is it in a long-term approach that would really bring the U.S. in? Or do you think the political changes in any case will bring them in to the process?
I think the United States will be in the process, and it will be in it no more than 2 years from now. That is, it may take a new administration in the United States, starting in January 2009, before the United States embraces mandatory measures. But it could even happen before then, because I think the Congress is ready to pass legislation, for example, with a cap-and-trade approach that is economy-wide, that is mandatory, that sets emissions limits and implements them through tradable emission permits. And the question then will be whether President Bush will veto it or not. And he might not veto it because he might decide that the political cost of doing that in a country where 3/4 of the population believes this is a big problem that needs to be addressed would be too high. So we could even have a serious approach from the United States before 2009. If we don't get it before 2009, we will certainly get it in a new administration, and I believe that's true whether the new administration is Democratic or Republican.
That's interesting. That would leave some of the countries that are probably hiding behind the U.S., their own real intentions, a little exposed, I think. So I'm just going to press you for one more question on this issue, because there is a lot of interest in it here. I'm sure you realize that it is the issue that keeps coming up. What's the U.S. going to do? And this is slightly ideological. I don't mean it in that way, but do you think there's a basic sort of mismatch between the underlying U.S. approach, as distinct from U.S. politics, and the UN approach, in the sense that the U.S. is so committed to not to formal agreements on, say, the transfer of technology, but to let the markets deal with it, and they tend not to sign international agreements, as with the Convention on the Rights of the Child or the International Court. There is something, a little discord in the U.S. approach across administrations that will always provide problems.
Well, there has been a strain of what many people call U.S. exceptionalism in the United States, the notion that the United States is so big, so important, so powerful, so technologically advanced that it can and should do what it wants. I think this strain is misguided. I think the nature of the world's energy problems, the nature of the climate problem, the nature of the development problem all underline that the world's biggest problems are going to require cooperation to address, and that therefore the United States is going to have to get on board to a much greater degree with international approaches. I think the United States is going to have to convert itself from a laggard in these respects into a leader. And I do believe that's very likely to happen in the next administration. I believe many in the Congress are ready for it. I think the business community, by the way, understands perfectly well that what we need is a combination of market-based approaches to these questions and government regulation to set the parameters and to set the goals. And it's quite extraordinary that the current administration is so out of step, not just with the environmental community, but with the business community in the United States, which is ready to go on these issues.